outcomes on those platforms. So I'm going to share my screen and talk at y'all for a while. So let me make sure I can do that. Great.
I just made you a co-host. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Folks can see my screen, I assume, and I'm going to hit the 1 second slideshow. Wonderful. So yeah, I am Julie Kamin. I'm the managing director of Prosocial Design Network. We're an organization that promotes prosocial design by connecting research to practice. And I know that the term prosocial design is used in different ways. So just to ground set, when we talk about prosocial design, we're mostly thinking about the set of features, patterns, processes that foster healthy interactions across platforms, and that can ensure a foundation of safety, well-being, and dignity. And one of the ways that we promote prosocial design is simply by curating existing research that points practitioners in the direction of evidence-based design solutions. And in doing so, we hope that are removing the need for those prosocial minded technologists to have to research the research themselves. But we recognize that there is a limited amount of research, and in particular research that is practice informed and that can be put into action. So, which is why we're also in the business of bringing together researchers and practitioners to learn and inspire each other and ultimately catalyze yet more actionable research. So last year, we were approached by Roblox's civility team, who are a team within Roblox centered on fostering a thriving community of players. And we're interested in discovering how prosocial design research could support their goals of fostering positive interactions and connection. We realized that we had a meeting of minds. They also were interested in not just learning from the research, but also in sparking new research that could support the entire social gaming ecosphere. So we hatched a plan to co-host a day-long convening towards those ends, bringing together researchers and practitioners from the Roblox teams. But that, of course, presented a challenge for us. So how do you design a convening so that researchers and practitioners can really learn from each other, can meaningfully inform with the insights, and then co-create an agenda for actionable research? And then how can you do that in one day? So in the next 12 minutes or so, we're going to try to share with you a bit about how we designed the day and some of the learnings from the day and then we will be talking about some of the research as well that came out of the convening. And I'll be joined with doing so with David Grüning, who's a researcher at Max Planck and also PDN's Science Board Chair. And in the Q&A, we'll also be joined by Daniel Hahn, who is our Roblox counterpart, and really the reason this whole thing happened. And Daniel will be able to answer questions representing his civility team, but not Roblox as a company.
Julia,
so to start
really quickly, just to set the scene with the folks in the room, because there's a bit of a generational difference. Roblox is like one of the complimentary. Listen,
remember, Nick.
Right? No, Roblox is one of the.
Is that like Lego?
Yeah. Well, I just think it's important to know. Roblox.
We're joking.
I know.
Please go ahead. This is important.
But it's
and
truly one of the most socially prominent connection platforms for youth and teens and adolescents, not for all generations, but it's extremely powerful culturally. And so this work is really important. So I just want to set that scene and make sure we appreciate this collaboration. That's really important. So sorry.
Thanks for saying that. It's funny.
Yeah.
When I mention Roblox to anybody who has children under the age of 18, they're like, "Oh, Roblox!" But people who are not in that position often have no idea what it is. But yes, and as we were really excited about this collaboration too, because a lot of the people that we've spoken to in our ecosphere talk about how gaming platforms really are such an incredible opportunity for promoting pro-social engagement. The last panel just talked about like even more so on pro-social on gaming sites. They're really invested in people having valuable experiences and creating connection. So that was really part of what drew us together. So yeah, but even so, even though we had these two parties who were interested in collaborating, um, we had to think really carefully about how we could kind of bridge this gap. So we had three anchors or three things that three critical elements that we want to be part of the day. So first, because we're focused on actionable insights and practice-informed research, our starting point was to identify the challenges shared by practitioners and researchers. And that's a process that started at the invitation stage and was weaved through the day. We also know, similar to how Gabe mentioned earlier, sometimes researchers and practitioners don't speak the same language. They use varying frameworks, and sometimes they use the same term to mean different things. So to ensure that participants weren't talking past each other, we really made sure they spend most of the day in working groups, collaboratively imagining and co-designing design solutions that we hoped would get them past those surface level understandings. And finally, we really wanted to keep the focus on fostering positive or pro-social behaviors and outcomes. As has been discussed multiple times today, platforms research in the responsible tech field tends to focus on mitigating harms for very good reason, but yet we wanted to instead focus on how to increase pro-social behaviors and outcomes. And just to get a little more granular, is the way for us to be able to do this in one day and move as smoothly as possible from ideation to co-design. We use what we call these design direction cards that acted as a through line. And so we introduced these cards beforehand in a pre-convening Zoom. And in each card, we invited participants to note the positive challenges that they wanted to design for. Again, positive in that they aim to increase pro-social behaviors and outcomes. And the cards also ask researchers to think about what design feature the intervention would touch onto. For example, if it's part of chat, if it's part of a player's avatar, which would help the researchers think about how designs would be put into practice. And then there was the intervention idea itself that they wanted to look at, and the theory of change, which could be based on intuition or social science of how that intervention would result in a pro-social outcome. So bringing all those elements together, we began the day hearing from the Roblox developers and a little more about Roblox. Again, I was not aware of this. I don't have children under the age of 17. The games themselves they are developed by the users, by usually often young people who are players who design the social games that are then hosted by Roblox. And Roblox, however, provides the platform and the tools to build those games and the surrounding safety features, for example. So after we started hearing from those developers and after grounding their day in their experiences and challenges, participants continued to imagine design solutions, filling out their design direction cards. Here you see some photos from the day. And then they worked in groups to select in their teams the two design directions that they saw were most promising. Then we entered a phase of organized chaos where we tried to organize these 40 participants, form them into groups around the design ideas that they were most excited about. And then finally, in the afternoon, these new groups, which each had at least one practitioner and one researcher, collaborated in building out the design ideas and thinking through a research project to study its potential effectiveness. Now, a really important part of the day is what came after. Researchers were invited to submit research proposals that were funded to be funded by Roblox to study the design solutions that either tested the designs workshopped in the day or otherwise motivated by the conversations of the day. And I will talk about the research projects that were funded, but first I'm going to hand it over to David to talk about all the ideas that emerged from those design direction cards.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to note here is that we were interested in this workshop not just to, at the end, have an outcome of like research, like actual research plans that we can put into practice, but also to kind of like see this evolution of like what kind of ideas, what set of ideas, diverse ideas come up in the beginning, so the session one, and how do they actually evolve or develop into design elements and then into actual research plans. And so that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. So we start with the ideas. Can you? Yeah. So this is the session one, right? So we have the 7 different tables, and they, in general, over 100 ideas were discussed across these 7 tables, and also these tables came out with very different ranges of output. So we had some tables coming up with like 4 or 5 actual ideas that were like written out on these design cards. Others had anything from like 15 to 18 ideas. And so in total, what we got out of this session one was 72 actual ideas written down on these design cards. These ideas then were categorized in these in 6 prosocial categories that you also saw on the design sheets. These ranged from social to teach to support, rules, cooperate, and help. So we try to kind of like span all kinds of different prosocial category elements that you could see in such design elements. One thing that's, I think, very interesting already here to see in terms of the evolution is that these categories are represented very asymmetrically across the 72 ideas. One thing to point out here is, so in total, in the sum, you have more than 72 because people were also able to indicate more than one category per design card. So some of these ideas, they got 2 categories just to avoid confusion. But one thing to point out here is that by far the most represented category is the social one. So engaging in general positively with others with the goal of connection, community. And these more specific ones, maybe also to be expected. So the ones on helping, cooperating, they were the ones least represented. Now, moving on to the session 2, so people actually picking some of these ideas and turning them into intervention elements or design elements. We got 14 of these, so like 2 per table, as Julia mentioned. One interesting thing here is, in terms of like the evolution of the categories, is that the social category gets way less in comparison to other categories. So now the ones that are actually most represented are support and cooperate, which is kind of interesting because especially the cooperate category was one of the least represented ones in the broad set of ideas, but now it was actually kind of representative for the more actual design elements. And one thing also to note, like this is not in this overview, so I'm just mentioning this here. People also indicated the actual features and the elements, right, for these developed designs, and they were very diverse. So these elements really range from anything that had to do with like a chat function or chat feature to badges, reputation systems, profiles, badges, but also all kinds of things on onboarding or guidelines that people were reminded of. And now coming to the actual research plan. So this is now the session 3. So people really pick one of these design elements and turn them into an actual research project. So a design and an outcome measurement. And this reduced these ideas to 9, which you can see in the bold format. These are basically the research ideas that survived the session 3. One thing to note here is that the rejected designs and the accepted designs differed quite a lot in some characteristics. So one important thing to note here is that the rejected designs depended way more heavily on persistent profiles and identity systems. They were also, in general, more operationally heavy to implement. So like just very hard to implement, basically, and also hard to scale. And some of them also focused not on fostering pro-social behavior, but really punishing antisocial behavior. And in comparison, the accepted designs, they were more recognition-based, so kind of like action by action-based recognition or score systems. They were also way more light touch, so easy to scale, easy to kind of like consider as an actual implementation. And they were also focused on more proactively enhancing pro-social behavior, not punishing antisocial behavior.
Thank you, David. That was fascinating. Truly, this is for everyone else, this is the first time I'm seeing this work, and so it was really interesting to see it all come together. I'm just gonna, before we move to Q&A, and so if folks have questions, please tee them up. But I'm going to share a little bit about the projects that we ended up funding, so again, we wanted to not just share insights and generate new ideas, but we actually wanted to catalyze research to test ideas or otherwise explore how to foster pro-social outcomes in social gaming. So these are the research projects that were funded. Roblox provided the funding, but they wanted us to review and run the review and selection process, leave that in our hands, which we did with the support of volunteer judges. So I'll talk a little bit about them just very quickly. 3 of the projects were really more exploratory, conducting interviews to understand the needs and motivations of players, what types of interventions would support those needs or enhance their pro-social motivations, and then co-developing features with players. And all of those projects are in progress. But to give you an idea, one study plans to co-design features that support restorative justice, which many here probably know go beyond punitive measures to instead repair harm. Another team is conducting interviews with players to examine how interventions can be used on Discord-like forums where players engage outside of gaming platforms to foster understanding and compassion there. And a third pair of researchers was really inspired by the developers who spoke at the opening panel, and they're developing and testing a feature to support developers learn about and adopt pro-social design within their games. The other 3 research projects are using experiments to actually test the effectiveness of some pro-social designs. Each of these are using gaming environments that were developed by themselves or by other researchers in order to test interventions in simulated platforms. So 2 of those studies are testing interventions based on a principle of queuing norms, which is one of the approaches that many here know has extensive evidence of its effectiveness. But in both studies, researchers are testing variations of designs that have been tested and doing so again in a gaming setting where there's less public research on the effectiveness of queuing norms. One team is asking the question of whether it matters when and where to queue norms. So testing whether doing so before players enter a game, so for example, when they're in the waiting room, or as part of the gaming environment experience themselves matters. The other team is testing something that you're seeing more often, which is whether an in-time recommender can pop in and suggest an AI alternative to a possibly harmful comment. So all of those studies are in progress. We're still dealing with the reality that academic research takes time, but we're really excited that one project is actually is already showing positive results. And so this team is looking at whether queuing players to self-disclose in a paired game could increase cooperation and more pro-social language. So example, queuing players to answer, what's the perfect day for you? And early results are showing that self-disclosure prompts can indeed have a pro-social impact. So just give you a highlight of the studies. For those who want to dig deeper, we're actually, these researchers are giving lightning talks tomorrow at another event that we're hosting with the Inspired Internet Pledge, and there's a link in the resources. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to move to the Q&A. And again, I should say also, we thought it was a great day. But we also learned that there is room for improvement on how we can create better conditions for connecting researchers and practitioners to really share knowledge and catalyze actionable research. So welcome questions about that, as well as the ideas and we welcome them because we hope to do more of these convenings. So now we love to open up to questions. And again, Daniel, our co-host and co-designer, is here to answer questions about the day from his and the civility team's perspective. So I am going to then open a Q&A and see if
I can
right.
take one in the room, Julia, while you go through the questions on Zoom, maybe to kick it off, and then, Trini, could you spotlight Daniel as well, just so we can see him?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Any questions from folks in the room? I see one. Yeah, you.
Yeah, given the difference of the business model between Roblox and the other social platforms that we're talking about, it's the different incentives. Did you or how did you consider the business outcomes or impacts of the various interventions that you discussed?
So just to repeat, make sure you guys heard, the question was, given the different business model of Roblox compared to other platforms, how do you, what was that end of your
How
question?
did you consider or the business impacts or outcomes?
Yeah.
of the intervention?
How did you consider the business impacts or outcomes of these interventions?
Julia, I can take that a little bit if you like.
That'd be great.
Great. So for the actual convening and workshop, that actually wasn't top of mind for us as we ideated, right? We really wanted to keep the ideas, interventions open to any and all ideas. Now, as we're getting the research and we're working more internally with our developer community, my team's next goals are to investigate that very question. One of the core things that we focus on is as we advocate for this internally, how can we advocate for the business side of why our developers should do this, other than, in our opinion, the moral and ethical implications, right? So we hope to do case studies in the future as we roll out some of these interventions and experiments with our developers to really get a sense of what those business impacts are. Of course, our hope is that they are positive business impacts through various lenses, whether it's a reduction in moderation, increase in engagement, et cetera. But that is our work that we're going to lean into later this year and in 2027.
Thank you, Daniel. Julie, I don't know if you want to pull from Zoom questions.
Yeah, Karima has two really great questions, which come up a lot also in our work with prosocial design. So both asking about the principles of prosocial design being operationalized across diverse cultural and social contexts, particularly in the global South, and integrating the gender dimension. And I think also the second question from Karina, thinking also about preventative digital environments capable of strengthening the resilience of younger generations against radicalization. I think so. One, to the question on the global South, definitely prosocial design research is dominated in the West, in the US, and in Europe, but we're really excited to see more and more. We're seeing more and more prosocial design research coming out of both South Asia, East Asia. There's some really great field studies conducted in sub-Saharan Africa. But yes, generally, a lot of we know about prosocial design has been tested in the West. I think in terms of using these principles to support against radicalization, I think a lot of, and Daniel might speak to this, and David also might want to speak to this, that a lot of what we're thinking about, and this is in tune with, I think, also the Council on Technology and Social Cohesion, is that if we can create positive, engaging experiences where young people feel a connection, they're, engaged in, positive social gaming, or, other environments, that is working in focusing them on the positive, and will hopefully, while though not directly, will hopefully have an effect in, in avoiding going into the radicalization route. I don't know if David or Daniel, you want to add on to that?
I mean, maybe one thing, because that was also mentioned in the question, I think it's such an important aspect is the educational aspect. So really think about these things. I think like the two key words that I'm always thinking about these things for the future is educational approaches and then also co-designing with users. So I think the most important thing to think about if we want to think about like a holistic system of strengthening people's resilience and capabilities and abilities for pro-social behavior, I think we have to think about tools that not just nudge or set up certain defaults, but also are in a conversation with the users, right? Because everyone is also different, has like different goals. For everyone, well-being also is kind of different. So I think the dialogue with the users is super important, like the co-designing, and then also the educational part. So making people aware of their own behavior, making people aware of the consequences of their own behavior.
Awesome. I think I saw one more hand in the room earlier. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there anyone doing work about embedding pro-social design gaming principles into simulation exercises? Because there's any issue that people are trying to address, it's always usually always involves bringing together a lot of stakeholders, and that usually results hopefully sometimes some sort of tabletop exercise or sometimes of simulation. It would be great to embed these principles so that people coming together to solve a problem actually get better at being partners because of their involvement trying to solve problems.
Yeah. So just to make sure you guys heard it, because he was in the back of the room, the question was, is there any work being done to embed pro-social design gaming principles into kind of simulation exercises, right? So a lot of kind of strategic convening stakeholders will do simulations to map out a problem and figure out how you respond. And the question was, is there a way that we could kind of have these pro-social principles to make those simulations more cooperative? People like, all right, let's get through this together. Interesting question. I don't know if you guys have answers to it, but
I don't, but that's a really fascinating area to look at. And I would love I don't know who the speaker is, but please reach out to me. I'd love to kind of explore that application. I think David's game as well. I want to say something obvious though, which is that I think a lot of these platforms have so much internal knowledge about what is effective. And so we know gaming platforms, there's a really rich knowledge base on how to engage people. But I think Leif may have mentioned this earlier, a lot of that institutional knowledge we don't really have. So when we talk about research and what we know, we're really talking about public research. But I think there's an opportunity there to take kind of the applied knowledge from gaming platforms and to apply it to other settings.
great. Thanks so much, Julia. And yeah, I'm happy to follow up with her offer to connect you. Chip, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Yeah, what?
There is a group called Prosocial World
Okay,
that does some of that, but not a simulation, where they try to use acceptance and commitment therapy
okay.
and systems design with prosocial components.
Oh, okay. So Chip, for speakers, had mentioned Prosocial World as potentially a stakeholder that's doing this type of work, but thank you, Chip. Awesome. Well,
Can I also just mention, there is another organization. They have the Prosocial Gaming. What is it called, Daniel? Their organization is called TIG. And they
Thriving
have
in Games Group. Yeah,
Thriving in Games Group, and they have a tremendous playbook on prosociality in gaming environments, which would be great. Folks should check out as well. I'll add that to the resources too.
excellent. Awesome. Okay, well, big round of applause to Julia and David and Daniel. Thank you so much.